for joining us, and let us begin straight away with the United Kingdom, a place whose very name after this week's events is beginning to sound a bit sarcastic. Because the UK this week voted to leave the European Union, a decision that has shaken the world, and not in a Muhammad Ali beating Sonny Liston kind of way, more in a those IKEA meatballs you love contain horse kind of way. And the fallout in Britain has been swift and significant.
The Brexit decision is off to a bit of a rough start here in London, at least. Stocks were in freefall, the pound historically weak, and the country's in the market for a new Prime Minister.
That's right. David Cameron announced he would be stepping down in the wake of the vote, which should make me happy, but in this situation, it doesn't. It's like catching an ice cream cone out of the air because a child was hit by a car. I mean, I'll eat it. I'll eat it. But it's tainted somehow. And before you have any sympathy for David Cameron, you should know this whole vote was his idea in the first place.
We will give the British people a referendum with a very simple in or out choice.
Yes, Cameron proposed the in or out choice himself, which he normally only does when he's deciding whether to fuck a pig's mouth. And meanwhile, the Brexit vote has boosted its two most vocal backers, Nigel Farage, leader of the UK Independence Party and three-time cover model for Punchable Face magazine, and Boris Johnson, a shaved orangutan with Owen Wilson's hair. And before and after the vote, both men drove home a common theme.
I believe that this Thursday can be our country's Independence Day.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
OK. Just a couple of things there. First, Britain was already independent. In fact, it's what many other countries celebrate their independence from. And second, the sequel to the movie they're quoting actually opened this week and features the wholesale destruction of London, which is beginning to feel pretty fucking appropriate right now. And I'm not even sure the pro-Brexit camp had planned on winning, because the next day they started speaking a lot more carefully about the promises that had been made. You might remember that campaign bus, which read, "We send the EU £350 million a week, let's fund our National Health Service instead." Well, here's Nigel Farage the morning after the vote.
The £350 million a week we send to the EU, which we will no longer send to the EU, can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim. That was one of the mistakes I think that the Leave campaign made.
Oh, now you're telling us! But it does seem that Farage will not correct factual mistakes when they're on the side of buses. I, therefore, would encourage Britain to take out bus ads reading, "Nigel Farage has spent hours trying to put his own penis in his arsehole." I presume he'll be silent about it. And while the benefits of a Brexit may well have been exaggerated, the downsides could be all too real. Prominent figures in Scotland and Northern Ireland are advocating for leaving the UK and rejoining the EU. Meanwhile, the EU is understandably worried about other member nations making exits of their own, so it may well negotiate as hard as possible to make an example of Britain. Basically, it seems like whoever the next UK Prime Minister is going to be, whether it's Boris Johnson or a racist tea kettle, they are going to be in for a rough few years, because once they invoke what's known as Article 50, they have just 2 years to negotiate their withdrawal and future relationship with the EU, on top of which they'll have to settle outstanding bills with the EU, hammer out new trade deals with dozens of countries, sift through thousands of EU regulations and decide which ones to keep, and figure out how migration will work, and all the while, lives hang in the balance. Take this Portuguese woman who has lived in the UK for years and has built a life there.
I have two daughters. One was born in Portugal, the second one was born in UK, and they asked me this morning, "Mum, what is going to happen to us?" And I told them, at this point, no one knows. I don't know my future. I don't know how to explain my children what is going to happen to their future.
Oh, perhaps I can help you with that, because it's easy. Just tell them that they might be screwed because a pig fucker called for a vote, a bus had some bullshit written on it, and then two idiots named Nigel and Boris quoted President Bill Pullman. They'll get it. They'll totally understand. And it's frankly hard not to think that some Britons may not have fully thought this through, especially when you look at some of the top search terms concerning the EU the next day.
Some of the most Googled questions in the UK since the polls closed last night. What does it mean to leave the EU? And what is the EU?
OK, that is clearly not good. On the list of all-time bad morning after Googles, that's got to be up there with can I get pregnant from mouth stuff and what is a swastika and also how do you remove a tattoo? And at least one person who voted to leave seems to have buyer's remorse.
I was very disappointed about the results. Even though I voted to leave, this morning I woke up and the reality did actually hit me. But if I had the opportunity to vote again, it would be to stay.
Well, you're actually in luck because it turns out, incredibly, there is going to be another vote coming up. And it's happening 1 week from... Of course there isn't! That was the fucking vote! It wasn't a practice round! That was it! And as if all this couldn't get any worse, as the full impact of what Britain had just done was sinking in, Donald Trump turned up in Scotland to promote his fucking golf course. And when he was asked about whether he, the presumptive Republican nominee, had any thoughts on the seismic events unfolding in Europe, this was his response.
I think it's going to end up being a great thing. And the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing is your people have taken the country back. And there's something very, very nice about that. And they voted, and it's been peaceful, and it was strong and very contentious. And in many respects, I watched last night. It was a little bit ugly, but it's been an amazing process to watch.
He just said absolutely nothing. Because, let me explain. First, he said a Brexit will end up being great, which it very likely won't. Then he said the word beautiful 3 times. Then he said your people have taken the country back, even though he was in Scotland, which overwhelmingly voted to remain in the EU. Then he said it's been peaceful, which it absolutely hasn't. Then he immediately contradicted himself by saying it's been contentious and ugly. And then he summed the whole thing up as amazing. Now, if he had simply breathed audibly into the microphone, the same amount of information would have been conveyed. And the thing is, later that day, he found a way to make this whole thing about himself, tweeting, many people are equating Brexit and what is going on in Great Britain with what is happening in the US. People want their country back. And you might think, well, that is not going to happen to us in America. We're not going to listen to some ridiculously haired buffoon peddling lies and nativism in the hopes of riding a protest vote into power. Well, let Britain tell you, it can happen, and when it does, there are no fucking do-overs. And now, this.
And now, the things news anchors are scared of.
Guys, you know, full disclosure, I'm a little terrified of clowns.
I have a fear of flying.
I'm afraid of drowning.
I'm scared of computers.
Nuns were raising me, so I have a fear of penguins.
Number one fear is elevators.
I have a fear of 2 things, mice and heights.
Sharks. I am terrified of them.
As a kid, I was terrified of quicksand.
I have a fear of the snooze. I have a fear of losing gift cards. I have a phobia of being tickled. I sweat through my dress.
Are you scared of cats?
I'm afraid of adult cats. Everything I'm reading in this prompter terrifies me right now.
Moving on. Our main story tonight concerns the Olympics, otherwise known as your biennial reminder that NBC exists. The Rio Games are just around the corner, so get ready for plenty of sappy athlete profiles like these.
Tori Bowie is a sprinter climbing her way to the top. Her success exceeds far beyond the unkempt field she started on in high school.
At his childhood pool, there's still a bench where he was forced to sit and take timeouts. But what others struggle to contain in daily life, Phelps put to full purpose when there was something on the line. Burroughs is powered by the elemental truth of the sport that fills his dreams.
Yes! Those videos aren't just uplifting, that's basically inspiration porn. That's what a fireworks display watches when it wants to jerk off. But while the Olympics feature thrilling displays of athletic prowess, they can also take place beneath the dark shadow cast by doping scandals. And this Olympics is no exception.
According to a report that reads like a Cold War spy thriller, Russian secret agents and a mysterious Moscow laboratory were used for state-sanctioned doping. A Russian athlete and trainer secretly filmed drugs being handed out like candy.
Russia accused, staggeringly, of using its security services, its new KGB, to tamper with supposedly tamper-proof bottles, allegedly using this hole in the laboratory wall to switch samples.
It's true. A Russian lab used a secret hole in the wall in an attempt to win Olympic medals, making this the first known example of a literal glory hole. And just listen to how the athletes ingested some of the drugs in the first place.
Ronchenkov's cocktails of 3 different performance-enhancing drugs were, on his instructions, washed down by athletes with alcohol to shorten the detection period. Chivas for male athletes, vermouth for the ladies.
Wait. Vermouth for the ladies? Look, I get doping is still going on, but I'd hoped that unnecessarily gendered illegal products died out with the Virginia Slims crack pipe. Hashtag feminism, hashtag crack pipes. Now, Russia's track and field team is currently banned from competing at the upcoming Olympics, but there's nothing new about this story. For as long as there's been science, people have used it to juice the human body. In the 1920s, a Russian-born French surgeon grafted thin slices of chimp testicles into people's scrotums, which was obviously ridiculous. These days we know you need a thick slice of chimp testicles. That's when it starts to work. And there's a long history of athletes circumventing the rules. In the 1904 Olympics, one of the marathon runners rode 11 miles in a car. A move that takes balls so big, they must have included a massive slice of chimp nuts. Now, as for the modern era, while no one knows exactly how many athletes dope, there are some shocking hints. One leaked survey found that an estimated 29% of track and field athletes at the 2011 World Championships said that they had doped in the past year. And presumably, that doesn't even include roided-out athletes who responded by yelling, "Survey make me angry," crumpling it up and throwing it to the moon. But the prevalence of doping is a little surprising when you consider how rigorous the testing regimes in top sport can be. Watch what happens to one runner just seconds after she crosses the finish line.
From now until she's able to provide a sample, 2 things will be constant: water and Flanagan's anti-doping chaperone. The chaperone makes sure the athlete doesn't try to cheat her drug test.
It's a big-time buzzkill, because you're really excited and you want to enjoy the moment, but then at the same time, you got to get focused and get ready to pee.
Now, that's got to be tough, because you're probably not ready to pee on command just after finishing a race. That's not what your body is prepared to do at that moment. It's like asking someone to have an orgasm in the middle of test driving a Nissan Cube. It's not going to be easy. That could take a while. And if you think it's no fun for the athletes, it's not much fun for the testers either. Real Sports followed one of them on a surprise out-of-competition test.
His task this early Saturday morning is to collect a sample from an elite rower named Alex Zosels. Alex agreed to let us film the moment of truth. Lowell is required to witness and have an unobstructed view.
That is the face of a man reconsidering every single decision he has made in his life, while also desperately wishing that athlete had not had asparagus for dinner. But despite rigorous testing, athletes are clearly slipping through the cracks for a number of reasons. For a start, there are multiple tests and none of them can detect the full range of drugs an athlete might be on, from anabolic steroids to EPO to human growth hormone to the most powerful drug of all, love. And testing itself, it's much less black and white than you might assume. There are wide variations in human biochemistry, so to avoid false positives, testing thresholds are often deliberately high, and athletes can dope and still come below those thresholds by doing things like microdosing or using masking agents to hide banned substances. And those are just some ways that it's possible for top athletes to cheat while still being able to say things like this.
People are smart. Do they say, has Lance Armstrong ever tested positive? No. Has Lance Armstrong been tested? A lot.
Wow, that is some confident lying. which isn't really surprising. Remember, this is a man who looked America dead in the eyes and said, bicycling is a very cool sport, and we fucking believed him. And the techniques some athletes have used to beat the system have been amazingly imaginative. Take, for instance, the European cyclists who would insert condoms of clean urine into their anus and then, in order to conceal everything, would cover it with fake hair blending into the real hair of the nether regions. And you have to imagine that to convince a cyclist to do that, a coach would need to deliver the most inspirational speech in the history of sports. Hey, do you want to be a champion? Do you? Then you jam in that piss balloon, pick up that hot glue gun, slap on that anus merkin and ride like a champion. Full anus, clear tests, can't lose. Get out there. Get out there and ride. And when they have tested positive, the excuses have been even more imaginative. Former sprinter Dennis Mitchell insisted his positive test for testosterone was the result of having sex at least 4 times the night before and drinking 5 bottles of beer. And if that is what your life is like, you don't really need the Olympics. Now, other athletes have blamed positive tests on eating a pie made from doped-up racing pigeons or eating a stew of meat and organs from uncastrated boars. And I'll say this, if Wheaties is really the breakfast of champions, their ingredient list will now include pigeon meat and pig jizz, or it's over. But none of that beats my favourite excuse of all time.
Cyclist Tyler Hamilton had to explain why somebody else's blood was in his veins. He claimed a vanished twin absorbed by his body in the womb. The court didn't buy it.
Oh, but that twin isn't vanished. It's me. I'm your brother, Tyler, and my name isn't John Oliver. It's Skylar Hamilton. And together we are Skylar and Tyler Hamilton, a pair of unvanished twins. And we're both equally good at biking. And in a way, you can see why athletes might want to dope. A split-second advantage can make the difference between winning and losing, and there's a lot of money on the line for everyone. There is a massive financial ecosystem dependent on spectacular athletic achievement in scandal-free games. And that includes the networks, who reap over $1 billion in ad sales, the IOC, which reaps billions in broadcast rights, and then there's the sponsors, who love using Olympic athletes for ads like these.
To perform your best, training's got to be a lifelong passion.
Michael!
Fueled by a foot-long passion. That's why Debbie Phelps is always there for her son Michael, with his favorite flavor-packed, fully jacked foot-long subs.
Stop. Because first, no professional swimmer wants a sandwich in the pool. And for the record, there is nothing more viscerally upsetting than a woman feeding her soaking wet, nearly naked adult son something called a fully jacked footlong. And when you combine, the point is, when you combine all the money incentivising athletes to get an edge with all the imperfections of tests, you would hope there'd be a robust, independent monitoring system in place. Unfortunately, some countries lack the resources for strong testing, while others seem to lack the desire. And to get a sense of just how compromised the system can become, let's go back to what happened in Russia, because here's how things worked. This is a Russian track and field athlete. He would compete for his national sports federation, in this case, ARAF. That federation would be under both the international body governing track and field, the IAAF, and the Russian Ministry of Sport, which is, of course, part of the Russian government. Now, separately, he would be tested by his country's anti-doping agency, in this case, RUSADA, who would send it to a laboratory which is credited by the World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA, which receives funding from both the IOC and countries like Russia. And already, you can see this system looks like a sprawling mess. But I guess technically it could work if each step was genuinely committed to stamping out doping. However, you've already seen that one lab had a glory hole, and on top of that, a recent investigation found that RUSADA officers routinely accepted bribes from athletes and gave them advance notice of when they'd be tested, and it also found the former head of ARAF had worked with the director of that glory hole lab to conceal positive drug tests. And while you would hope that the IAAF would have been rooting all of this out, the head of their anti-doping department was banned for 5 years after an ethics investigation. At which point, this is all actually making FIFA look good. FIFA. Fucking FIFA. And they are basically just the mafia with slightly better branding. And finally, there is WADA. Now, they are supposed to help prevent things like this, but their investigation of the scandal got off to a rocky start because we really only have all this information thanks to a whistleblower, a former Rusada employee named Vitaly Stepanov. He approached WADA with a great deal of information, but their response was not reassuring.
He sent 200 emails and 50 letters detailing what he had witnessed. But Vitaly says WADA told him it did not have the power to investigate inside Russia.
Now, that is true. At that point, WADA didn't have the explicit authority, but that's a bit weird in and of itself. You don't want the global anti-drug agency to basically have the authority of mall cops. Hey, thief, stop or I'll be forced to go straight to the food court and grumble about your behaviour into a bag of Wetzel's Pretzels Cinnabits. And while WADA now has more authority and has appointed an independent commission to investigate the evolving Russia scandal, their head, Craig Reedie, sent a weirdly cosy email to an advisor to the Russian sports minister saying, "On a personal level, I value the relationship I have with the minister, and there is no intention in WADA to do anything to affect that relationship." Which is an unsettlingly chummy tone for a regulator to take. If Tom Colicchio promised to judge Top Chef fairly, but then said to one contestant, "I value my relationship with you and will do nothing to affect it," the other contestants would rightly think, "This is clearly pointless. Here's a hot pocket. Go fuck yourself." And at this point, I'm supposed to tell you that Russian officials and the former head of ARAF have broadly denied all these accusations, and for his part, Reedie says he's done nothing to interfere with the Commission's investigations and his email had been misconstrued. And, you know, sure. And while this clearly isn't the system we need, it might actually be the system we want. Just listen to former head of WADA, the phenomenally named Dick Pound, who has a depressing theory about why more dopers aren't caught.
Machinery's all there. The question is, do people really want it to work? I mean, you can do hundreds of thousands of tests and catch nobody if you don't want to catch anybody.
Is that what you think is happening, that people don't want it to work?
People don't want it to work.
OK, well, first, Dick Pound should really insist that everyone call him Rick or Rich if he really wants anyone to fully listen to him. But second, he actually wrote a report for WADA assessing the state of drug testing, which found among the broader sports community there is no general appetite to undertake the effort and expense to deliver doping-free sport, which is pretty alarming. We're treating good testing like calorie counts on restaurant menus. Oh, everyone might say they want it until they find out that one bloomin' onion is 32 million calories, and then they are fucking done. And you might be thinking, well, let's just give up. Why don't we just let everyone dope? But that is definitely not the answer. For a start, that could be very dangerous, with athletes tempted to take greater and greater amounts to get that split-second edge. And it could also potentially force clean athletes to dope, at which point you've pretty much destroyed the integrity of sport. Because if you want to know what it's like to compete against an artificially enhanced athlete, just listen to Alicia Montano. She lost at the 2012 Olympics to Maria Savinova, one of the Russian athletes implicated in the current doping scandal.
This was the first time Montano allowed herself to watch the race. She lost to gold medalist Maria Savinova. Montano had led the race for about 600 meters before finishing fifth.
I mean, Savinova passed you like you were, with all due respect.
Literally standing still.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you realize, at that moment, I realized I'm racing against robots.
Robots.
I'm racing against robots.
She's racing against robots. And it wasn't just Savinova, because silver and bronze went to a Roomba and a roided-out Teddy Ruxpin. and when she competed against those same Russian athletes at the World Championships the next year, it was déjà vu.
Savinova blew by her in the last 50 meters to finish second. All Montano could do was throw herself across the finish line, beaten, and for the first time, broken.
And I felt really failed and really betrayed, and I actually felt like my career was a farce, you know, that this is just, what am I doing out here? What's the point?
What am I doing here? What's the point? She's a world-class athlete, and she was left feeling like anyone who paid for a ticket to Now You See Me Too. What are we doing here? What are any of us doing here? What's the point in this? What are we doing? And look, we focused on Russia here because the details are spectacular, but they are far from the only offenders. In recent years, Kenya, Jamaica and China have all had doping scandals, and American athletes have cheated too. Justin Gatlin and Tyson Gay have both been banned for doping in the past, yet they're still expected to compete in Rio for the US team. So think of doping like Vladimir Putin. It's far from just a Russian problem. It's something that adversely affects the entire world. So it feels like we have two choices at this point. If we truly want to clean up sports, we should empower WADA by making it truly independent and put pressure on the broader sports system to aggressively combat doping. And if we don't really care enough to make changes, we should at the very least make our syrupy athlete promos a bit more honest.
Ever since I was a kid, I've loved to run. My parents sometimes tell me I could run before I could walk, which doesn't really make sense, but I always believe them.
It's 5 a.m. and Olympic hopeful Brandon Schmidt has already been at the gym for 2 hours with his coach.
Push it! Push it! Push it! Push it!
I've been working with Brandon ever since he was 8 years old. I discovered him sprinting across a playground. That's how I used to find my runners. Just hang out at playgrounds, look for the quickest kid. Can't do that anymore, of course.
For Brandon, every morning it's the same routine.
First, I do cardio, then weights, and then it's just all the pills I could cram into my mouth.
Push it!
Brandon's road to Rio began years ago, in a small bedroom in Darbyville, Ohio.
When I was a kid, I had posters of all my heroes. Lance Armstrong, Marion Jones, Ben Johnson, Mark McGuire, and that one guy who took a car for 11 miles of an Olympic marathon. I wanted to be just like them.
From those modest beginnings, Coach Jason Clark helped fill Brandon with the stuff winners are made of.
Here, you need your purples. We've tried pills containing everything. Cat dick, dog dick, lizard dick, rhino dick, badger balls, muskrat anuses, chipmunk fists, moose face. A 5-hour energy shot straight into his eyeball.
Ow!
One time I put a tampon full of jet fuel up his ass. Push it! Another time, I got Regis Philbin to scream into a jar and then had him inhale him. All of this just to get that edge.
But even the most prepared athlete can sometimes get caught. And that's when Brandon relies on Coach Clark's strict regimen of excuses.
And go!
I slipped and fell in a vat of liquid amphetamines.
Good. Next!
I was walking down this dark back alley and a guy came up and stabbed me with a syringe full of EPO.
Sweeter! Sweeter!
I ate my twin in the womb.
I don't believe you!
An uncastrated boar spit in my mouth.
Plausible, I like it. Stick the landing.
Last night I drank 5 beers and fucked everyone in America.
Time!
How'd I do?
You're ready.
Now, with his eyes on Rio and Olympic gold, Brandon Schmidt is hoping that his years of hard work will finally pay off.
For me, to win in Rio, that'd be a fairy tale come true, you know? It'd be a Cinderella story. But like if the slipper didn't actually belong to Cinderella and she took a lot of drugs to change the size of her foot to fit in the slipper, and then Prince Charming fell for it. And they lived happily ever after. That's my dream.
That's our show. Thank you so much for watching. We're off for a few weeks. We'll be back July 24th. Good night.
Push it! 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 Push it!